So, I want you to try a thought experiment with this.
Right.
Just close your eyes for a second.
Assuming you weren't driving, obviously.
Yeah, please don't close your eyes if you're behind the wheel.
Ugh.
But if you can, picture yourself as a 15-year-old student.
Okay.
And let's place this scene in a really specific setting just to ground it. You're in a 10th grade civics and government class.
I remember those.
We all do.
Yeah.
And it's a Tuesday morning. You are in a stable, highly developed, democratic country. Let's say you're sitting in a classroom in Toronto, Canada.
Very stable, very normal.
Exactly. The winter wind is kind of rattling the windows. The fluorescent lights overhead have that familiar low hum. And the bell just rang.
Everyone is settling down.
Right. And your teacher walks to the front of the room, sets down this incredibly dense stack of files, taps the whiteboard and says,
Pay attention.
Basically. The teacher says, today we're going to learn about the absolute fragility of democracy, the illusion of privacy, and the total collapse of freedom of speech in the digital age.
Light subject for a Tuesday morning. Seriously. But the teacher adds, to understand how breathtakingly fast these things can unravel, we aren't going to look at a history book. We are going to look at the Oriental Republic of Uruguay right now in the year 2026.
It really is just the perfect framing device for what we are about to undertake in this deep dive.
It is.
Because what we have sitting on the table between us today is, it's honestly one of the most complex and frankly alarming stacks of source material we've ever tackled.
Yeah, it's a mountain of data.
It really is. We are looking at this massive convergence of forensic cybersecurity case studies, deep journalistic investigations, internal police cybercrime reports.
And a ton of raw, verifiable social media evidence.
Exactly. And our mission today is to thoroughly dissect this multifaceted, ongoing crisis that is unfolding in Uruguay right now.
We're talking about the wrongful imprisonment of elite hackers.
Multi-million-dollar state surveillance systems that are operating with, honestly, terrifying autonomy.
A deeply polarized political landscape. And this fundamental global battle over who actually controls the definition of free speech when algorithms make the rules.
And to make sure we don't get entirely lost in the weeds here.
Because we easily could.
Yeah.
The international law and highly technical cybersecurity jargon is dense.
Very dense. So we're going to use that Canadian classroom as our anchor.
I like that.
Whenever the geopolitical or the technical mechanics get overwhelmingly complicated, we're going to relate these massive national crises back to the ecosystem of that high school.
So we'll talk about school rules.
Digital lockers, hallway cameras, student council drama.
And we're not doing this to minimize what's happening.
No, the stakes literally couldn't be higher. But when you strip away the legal terminology and all the political posturing, the fundamental dynamic of power, control, and surveillance, they're incredibly similar to what a 15-year-old experiences every single day.
I think that approach is essential. But before we open the first file, we do need to establish the golden rule of this specific classroom.
Yes, the disclaimer.
The source material we're examining today is a live wire.
It really is.
It contains highly charged, deeply polarized political content. It involves left-wing and right-wing actors, state governments, militant political factions.
And as your guides through this material, we are operating strictly as neutral educators.
Completely impartial.
We are not taking sides, we are not endorsing any political party, and we are absolutely not validating any specific ideological viewpoint.
Our job is strictly to impartially report the facts, trace the timelines, and present the arguments exactly as they are documented in the provided sources.
We just want you to understand the architecture of this conflict from every possible angle.
Consider that the syllabus for today.
Perfect. So let's set the stage by looking at the political backdrop.
Let's do it.
Because if you look at the historical context of Latin America, Uruguay is widely celebrated as an absolute bastion of democratic stability.
It's often referred to as the Switzerland of South America.
Exactly. Strong institutions, a history of progressive social policies, a culture that really prides itself on civic engagement.
But looking at our notes, something fundamentally fractured following the national elections in 2024.
Right. The data shows an incredibly tight race. The left-wing coalition, which is known as the Frente Amplio.
Led by a figure named Yamandu Orsi.
Yes, Orsi. They narrowly won the presidency. And when I say narrowly, the sources specify they took 49.8% of the vote.
Against the opposition's 46%.
That is a razor-thin margin.
You effectively have a nation cleaved right down the middle.
And a society cleaved in half politically is just incredibly vulnerable to digital polarization.
What is fascinating, well, and alarming really, is how rapidly that initial physical political friction migrated almost entirely into the digital sphere by early 2026.
To understand that tension, we have to look at the geopolitical undercurrents that the sources highlight.
Right, the diplomatic missions.
Yeah. So shortly after taking power, President Orsi undertook a massive diplomatic mission. He traveled to Beijing with a delegation of 150 people.
That's a huge delegation.
Massive. And they went to meet directly with Chinese President Xi Jinping.
And the explicit goal of this trip, according to the documents, was to deepen a strategic partnership focused heavily on technology, telecommunications, and artificial intelligence.
Concurrently, back home, the Uruguayan Senate began passing resolutions that forcefully supported the government of Cuba and formally rejected U.S. embargoes against the island.
I can see how those specific geopolitical moves would immediately ignite the opposition.
Oh, absolutely. Let's look at the competing narratives here because they are completely irreconcilable.
On one side, you have the political opposition.
Right. They look at a massive tech partnership with Beijing and formal support for Cuba, and they sound the alarm.
They claim the new government is deliberately enacting a Cuba-style authoritarian drift.
The sources show the opposition arguing that the state is beginning to weaponize the police force and the judicial courts, specifically to silence right-wing dissenters and political critics.
They even go so far as to invoke the imagery of the Falcon Verde.
And we should pause to explain the gravity of that term, right?
We definitely should. The Falcon Verde, or Green Falcon, is not just a metaphor.
No.
It refers to the green Ford Falcon cars that were notoriously used by death squads and secret police during the brutal military dictatorships that swept across South America's southern cone in the 1970s and 1980s.
Including in Uruguay.
Exactly. When the opposition uses that term, they are deliberately evoking the darkest, most violent period of state repression in the country's modern history.
They are alleging a return to state terror, just updated for the digital age.
It's a terrifying accusation.
It really is. But then I look at the arguments from the defenders of the administration, and they are painting a completely different picture.
The supporters of the Orsi government completely reject the authoritarian label.
They argue that this isn't political repression at all. To them, it's simply lawful accountability.
Their narrative is that the state is merely enforcing the standard, existing laws against defamation, targeted hate speech, and the organized spread of fake news.
And they point to a very compelling historical fact in the sources.
Right, regarding the previous administration.
Yeah. These exact same legal mechanisms, the exact same cybercrime units, were used frequently by the previous right-wing administration under President Luis Lacalle Pou.
That is the crux of the administration's defense. They are arguing that the opposition is suffering from a massive case of hypocrisy.
To the defenders, prosecuting someone for organizing a targeted digital harassment campaign is not political persecution.
It is the absolute baseline requirement for maintaining public order in a digital society.
If you break the law online, you face the consequences regardless of your political affiliation.
Let's pull this back to our Canadian high school thought experiment to really understand the tribalism at play here.
Okay, I'll lay it out.
Imagine your school just had a highly contentious student council election. The vote was basically 50-50.
Right.
Half the school firmly believes that the newly elected student president is weaponizing the hall monitors to unfairly target, harass, and punish the kids who voted for the losing side.
They feel like they're living under a hallway dictatorship.
Exactly. But the other half of the school says, no, you aren't being targeted because of your vote. You are being punished because your side is constantly bullying people on the school's message boards.
And the hall monitors are just enforcing the exact same code of conduct we had last year.
Yes. Both sides absolutely believe they are the victims, and both sides believe they're the ones protecting the integrity of the school.
That is a perfect distillation of the environment Uruguay is operating within right now.
It is a powder keg.
Digital tension, suspicion, hyper-partisanship.
And to understand how disastrously the legal system handles complex digital issues in this type of high-stakes environment, we have to examine a foundational case study provided in our sources.
It's a case that proves just how unprepared the state was to govern the digital realm.
This brings us to the story of Alberto Daniel Hill.
Looking at these files, Alberto Daniel Hill is the absolute center of gravity for so much of this narrative.
He really is.
Before we get to what happened to him, we need to establish who he is because his background is crucial to understanding the injustice here.
Right, he is a highly credentialed Uruguayan cybersecurity expert.
The sources note he holds dual Italian and Uruguayan citizenship, but professionally, his resume is just staggering.
He holds Project Management Professional, or PMP, certifications,
He has extensive ISO specializations.
which are the international standards for information security management.
Exactly. He is a platinum member with ISACA, a global professional association focused on IT governance.
By every verifiable metric, this man is an elite, globally recognized professional in his field.
He is not a teenager in a basement guessing passwords.
No, he is a recognized authority on system architecture and digital defense.
And in 2017, his expertise led to his entire life being dismantled by the state.
The sources detail how Hill discovered a critical, catastrophic vulnerability in the external systems of a major Uruguayan medical provider.
And to give you an idea of the severity, this wasn't just administrative data,
Highly sensitive patient data.
including the names and statuses of patients diagnosed with HIV.
It was left completely exposed to the public internet due to terrible system architecture.
So, operating strictly as an ethical hacker, what the industry calls a white hat, Hill attempted to report this vulnerability responsibly to the appropriate authorities.
Specifically, the National Computer Emergency Response Team, known as CERTURI.
So he finds the open door, and he tells the security guards about it so they can lock it.
That is exactly what you want a cybersecurity expert to do.
But according to the timeline here, the vulnerability was not patched in time.
Sometime later, a malicious external hacker, a black hat, found that exact same vulnerability.
They breached the medical provider system and demanded a ransom.
The hacker demanded a payment of $60,000 in Bitcoin, explicitly threatening to release the highly sensitive HIV statuses of the patients to the public if the ransom wasn't paid.
It's a textbook extortion scheme.
It is. So, how does the Uruguayan justice system respond to this crisis?
Well, they don't utilize their resources to track down the malicious hacker who issued the ransom.
No, they turn their sights on the person who initially tried to warn them.
The police executed a raid on Alberto Hill's home.
And they didn't just quietly investigate him.
They proudly announced to the national media that they had successfully dismantled a major cyber threat and seized the arsenal of a hacker.
I was reading the forensic breakdown of this so-called arsenal in the source material.
Specifically Table 1, right? Which lists the seized evidence.
Yes, and I had to read it 3 times to make sure I wasn't misunderstanding the translation.
It's completely absurd.
Let's actually unpack this evidence list because it shows a level of technical illiteracy from the police that is almost hard to comprehend.
First item. The police seized a plastic Guy Fawkes mask.
You know, the mask from the movie V for Vendetta?
Wait, a plastic mask?
Yes. The police officially interpreted the presence of this plastic mask in his home as unequivocal physical proof that Hill was a high-ranking member of the decentralized global criminal network known as Anonymous.
The reality, as anyone remotely adjacent to internet culture knows, is that the Guy Fawkes mask is just a ubiquitous pop culture collectible.
It's an aesthetic symbol of hacker culture that practically every tech enthusiast, gamer, or IT professional might have sitting on a bookshelf.
Using it as proof of criminal conspiracy is like arresting someone for owning a Darth Vader helmet and accusing them of building a Death Star.
It gets so much worse.
Okay, what's the second item on the evidence list?
A paper cutter.
Like a standard office paper cutter with the wooden base and the metal arm.
Yes. The official police report described this object as a guillotine, explicitly attaching violent criminal connotations to it, as if you were building medieval torture devices.
It's office equipment used to trim printer paper.
The desperate need to physically manifest a digital threat leads to these absurd categorizations.
But the misinterpretation of his technical hardware is where it becomes truly damaging.
The police seized a number of Ledger hardware wallets.
For those who might not know, a hardware wallet is a secure USB device used to store the cryptographic keys for cryptocurrency.
The police claim these devices were highly specialized, illicit instruments designed specifically for laundering stolen cryptocurrency and managing illegal ransom payments.
And the reality.
According to the sources, Alberto Hill was literally an official, legally authorized reseller of Ledger hardware wallets in the country of Uruguay.
So the police had raided his house and confiscated his legal commercial inventory, presenting it to the press as a money laundering syndicate.
Exactly.
And the final piece of evidence is perhaps the most egregious misunderstanding of his profession.
They seized several devices known as rubber duckies.
The rubber ducky looks like a standard USB thumb drive, right?
But when plugged into a computer, it acts like a keyboard and can inject pre-programmed keystrokes at superhuman speeds.
The police classified these devices strictly as digital weapons meant for malicious system infiltration.
The reality is that rubber duckies are standard, industry-recognized penetration testing tools.
They are used routinely by security auditors and ethical hackers to legally assess system vulnerabilities for their clients.
It is the exact equivalent of a locksmith owning a set of lockpicks.
But the Uruguayan judicial system didn't see a locksmith. They saw a burglar.
Because of this profound systemic misunderstanding of technology, the consequences for Hill were devastating.
The sources detail how he was interrogated without proper, specialized legal representation.
He was subjected to extreme psychological duress, including documented threats from Interpol officials that they would arrest his family members if he didn't cooperate.
Under this immense pressure, he was coerced.
And ultimately, he was thrown into a maximum security prison, spending 8 months in preventive detention before even facing a trial.
And we have to discuss the specific legal justification a judge used to deny him bail and keep him in that prison for 8 months.
It is perhaps the single most shocking detail in this entire report.
The judge ruled that Alberto Hill possessed advanced computer knowledge that was so dangerous, so seemingly magical, that if he were released on bail, he could, and I'm quoting the translation of the judicial reasoning here, mentally alter evidence that was physically stored on servers at Interpol headquarters.
Mentally alter evidence.
The judge literally believed this man was a digital X-Men character.
They believed he possessed the telepathic ability to rewrite hard drives from across the city using only his mind.
It sounds like a bad science fiction movie script, but this was a real legal ruling that stole 8 months of a man's life.
It reveals a judiciary that views technology not as science, but as dark magic.
And the tragic irony is that while the judge was terrified of Hill's mind, the actual physical police force was actively destroying the real digital evidence.
The forensics show that the police left Hill's seized computers powered on and connected to external networks for a full week while in custody.
In the realm of digital forensics, that completely destroys the chain of custody.
Anyone could have accessed, altered, or deleted files during that time.
Furthermore, the police completely ignored nearly 30 hard drives sitting openly on his floor during the raid,
Proving they fundamentally had no idea where digital evidence is actually stored.
Let's bring this back to our 15-year-old student in the Canadian classroom, because the analogy perfectly explains the systemic failure here.
Imagine you're walking into school, and you notice the heavy metal front door to the building has a broken lock. It won't latch.
Because you are a responsible student, you go straight to the principal's office and warn them that the school isn't secure.
The principal thanks you. But the next night, someone breaks through that exact door and robs the school's computer lab.
The next morning, the principal calls you into the office, searches your backpack, and finds a standard Phillips head screwdriver that you use every day in your shop class.
The principal holds it up, calls it a burglar's master weapon, expels you on the spot, and calls the police.
And what is the immediate, long-term consequence of that principal's action?
No student in that school will ever report a broken lock again.
And that is exactly what happened to the entire country of Uruguay.
The sources heavily emphasize the massive chilling effect this prosecution caused.
Because of the psychological and legal destruction of Alberto Hill and other hackers mentioned in the sources.
Such as a Uruguayan hacker known as Vlad, who faced 4 to 6 years in prison, or the Argentine hacktivist known as Gov.F.
The entire community of ethical security professionals went dark.
They completely stopped reporting vulnerabilities to the National Emergency Response Team, CERTWI.
They reasonably feared that trying to help the state would result in their own prosecution.
So by aggressively prosecuting the whistleblower who exposed the vulnerability, the state essentially guaranteed that the entire country's digital infrastructure would remain profoundly insecure, blind, and vulnerable to actual malicious actors.
Precisely. Which serves as the perfect transition to the next major crisis outlined in our documents.
Because while the Uruguayan state was demonstrating absolute incompetence in understanding and defending its own digital architecture, it was simultaneously spending millions of dollars to aggressively expand its surveillance capabilities over its own citizens.
This brings us to a system known as El Guardian.
El Guardian. The Guardian. It has a very dystopian ring to it.
Let's look at the specs. According to the sources, El Guardian is a centralized telecommunications interception system that the Uruguayan government purchased in relative secrecy.
From a Brazilian technology firm called Digitro.
The price tag was roughly $2 million.
And the capabilities of this software are frankly staggering.
It centralizes the interception of all national telecommunications. The documents state it has the capacity to simultaneously monitor up to 800 mobile phones, 200 physical landlines, and 100 social media or email accounts in real time.
It can even generate invisible mirror accounts to silently track and record all incoming and outgoing traffic from a target without them ever knowing.
It is a machine designed for total information awareness.
Now, the government's public defense of purchasing and deploying this massive surveillance apparatus is that it operates under strict, uncompromising legal oversight.
They point to a protocol called SAIL.
The System of Administration of Legal Interceptions.
Theoretically, the system is designed so that an intelligence officer cannot simply type in a phone number and start listening.
The protocol supposedly requires a verified digital signature from both a presiding judge and a prosecutor before an interception can begin.
But the civil rights organizations cited in our sources argue that this oversight is a complete illusion.
Mostly due to the sheer math of the situation.
The data shows that the volume of legal interceptions completely exploded. They went from roughly 4,800 wiretaps in 2019 to over 12,000 active interceptions by 2022.
Legal scholars and privacy advocates warn that with this massive volume, it is humanly impossible for the judiciary to thoroughly review the merits of every case.
They argue that overburdened judges are simply rubber-stamping police requests without any real critical scrutiny.
The technology moves faster than the legal oversight can possibly manage.
And the illusion of that security completely shattered in April of 2024.
The sources outline a massive systemic internal scandal within the Ministry of Interior.
High-ranking police intelligence officers. The documents specifically name officials like Silcar Lara and Walter Amarin were caught routinely bypassing the SAIL security protocols.
They weren't using sophisticated hacking tools.
No, they were simply sharing passwords.
They were using the unique credentials belonging to their colleagues to irregularly and illegally access the El Guardian system without judicial warrants.
It's the most basic security failure imaginable. You build a $2 million digital fortress, and the guards are passing the keys under the door to each other.
And what were they doing with this illegal access?
The sources show they were caught downloading highly sensitive classified files.
For example, they accessed the audio recordings and intelligence files from a famous 1978 political assassination case involving poisoned wines.
Let's contextualize that. The 1978 poisoned wines case is a deep, dark scar in Uruguayan political history.
During the dictatorship, bottles of poisoned wine were sent to prominent political figures, resulting in the death of Cecilia Fontana de Heber.
It remains one of the most sensitive, historically loaded cold cases in the country's intelligence archives.
The fact that unauthorized police officers were casually browsing and downloading audio from this file using shared passwords shows a total collapse of internal compartmentalization.
Even the ex-director of intelligence, Mariana Mora, had to publicly admit that she could not guarantee password sharing wasn't a widespread, institutionalized practice.
Which raises an incredibly dangerous question. When a state has a machine that can listen to anyone and the operators of that machine have no internal discipline, what happens when someone tries to expose them?
We have the answer in the source material. Eduardo Prive, a prominent investigative journalist, was the one who broke the story about the El Guardian password sharing scandal.
He published the truth.
And how did the state respond?
The intelligence apparatus subsequently used the system to initiate an illicit police surveillance operation against Prive himself.
They spied on him, they spied on his family, and they tracked his communications specifically to unmask his confidential journalistic sources within the police department.
It is a textbook, terrifying example of mission creep.
A massive surveillance tool, justified to the public as necessary for fighting drug cartels and organized crime, immediately pivots to monitor the free press the moment the state is embarrassed.
But the ultimate irony here is what the sources refer to as the national cyber debt.
While the state has constructed this terrifying, all-seeing eye to monitor its own citizens domestically, it is apparently completely incapable of protecting itself from external attacks.
Let's look at what the documents call the PKI catastrophe. This is vital to understand.
A hacker, operating under the alias Oragugu 1337, executed a complete breach of the Uruguayan state's public key infrastructure, or PKI.
We need to slow down and explain exactly what a public key infrastructure is, because the scale of this disaster is hard to overstate.
A PKI is the foundational cryptographic framework that a nation uses to issue and manage digital certificates.
It is the complex math that proves you are who you say you are on the internet.
In Uruguay, this is not just a technical detail, it is deeply embedded in the legal system.
A state-issued digital certificate has the exact same legally binding power as a physical signature written in ink on a piece of paper.
It is used for banking, signing contracts, and accessing government services.
And according to the sources, this hacker, Oragugu 1337, didn't just breach the perimeter.
They cracked the passwords for 30,000 national ID certificates.
Yes, let the gravity of that sink in. By compromising the PKI, the hacker effectively obtained a digital master key to the nation.
They acquired the cryptographic ability to legally impersonate tens of thousands of Uruguayan citizens.
They could forge legally binding signatures, authorize transactions, or theoretically alter state records.
It is the digital equivalent of someone breaking into the national mint and stealing the plates to print passports.
And this was not an isolated incident of vulnerability. The sources also detail a catastrophic breach in 2021 involving the Ministry of Defense.
I see that here. It involves something called RAM, ransomware.
Correct. RAM is a sophisticated strain of ransomware used to encrypt a target's files and extort them for the decryption key.
But in this case, the attackers didn't just lock the files, they exfiltrated them.
A Mexican cybersecurity expert discovered that hackers had successfully breached the Uruguayan naval networks and subsequently posted 13.6 gigabytes of highly sensitive military data for sale on the dark web.
The asking price was $500,000.
This data cache included internal identification documents, confidential military folders, and strategic naval communications.
Let's bring this all back to our Canadian classroom analogy to understand the profound hypocrisy of this situation.
Imagine your school administration spends millions of dollars installing super advanced AI-powered cameras everywhere.
These cameras don't just watch the hallways. The technology is so invasive that it can magically read the private text messages on the phone in your pocket while you walk to class.
The principal stands in front of the student body and promises, "We are only going to use this technology to catch the kids who are dealing drugs behind the gym."
But a few weeks later, you find out that teachers are actually sharing the camera passwords on sticky notes in the staff lounge.
And they are using the system to read the private diaries of students they personally dislike or want to expel.
That is the internal abuse.
Right, but it gets worse. While the teachers are busy spying on the students, an outsider from a rival school hacks into the school's actual grading system.
Because the school spent all its money on cameras instead of secure locks, the hacker easily breaches the mainframe,
Changes everyone's grades to an F.
steals all the students' medical records, and posts them on a billboard in the center of town.
And the school administration has absolutely no idea how it happened or how to stop it.
It is a profound systemic symmetry of risk. The state is highly invasive and aggressive domestically against its own people.
But it is incredibly brittle and vulnerable externally against real threats.
And when a state is that anxious and that polarized, it eventually turns its legal apparatus on everyday speech.
This brings us to the boiling point in our timeline, the free speech crisis of early 2026.
We discussed the polarized political environment earlier, the razor-thin election of the Frente Amplio.
In February and March of 2026, the sources indicate that this polarization exploded into a full-blown judicial crisis.
We begin to see the prosecutor's office, known as the Fiscalia, and the police cybercrime unit start issuing formal legal summonses to ordinary citizens, specifically for the content of their online posts.
We are witnessing the rapid, aggressive judicialization of public speech.
And the sources provide incredibly specific case studies to show exactly how uneven and terrifying this process is.
Let's start with the case of Leandro Grill.
Leandro Grill is a prominent left-wing journalist and political activist in Uruguay.
According to the documents, an organized online trolling campaign was launched against him on social media, specifically on Platform X, formerly Twitter.
The trolls adopted a highly vulgar, coordinated meme as their display names to harass him.
The phrase they use translates roughly to a very crude sexual insult involving a former dictator, Goyo Alvarez, and Grill's mother.
And we should clarify for context, Goyo Alvarez was the de facto president of Uruguay during the military dictatorship in the early 1980s.
A figure associated with severe human rights abuses.
So invoking his name in this way is designed to be as offensive and historically painful as possible.
Exactly. It was a coordinated, deeply personal, and highly political attack.
In response to this harassment, Grill, or his associates, filed formal complaints with the authorities.
Consequently, the police cybercrime unit began tracking down the IP addresses and issuing formal police summonses to the Twitter users utilizing this meme.
Such as the specific user account identified in the sources as @FelipeVille26158.
Now, to the defenders of the administration and the cybercrime unit, this is the legal system working perfectly.
They view this as a necessary state intervention to combat targeted harassment, cyberbullying, and serial defamation that pollutes the digital public square.
I understand that perspective. If someone is orchestrating a harassment campaign, you want the authorities to step in.
But the sources provide a parallel case study that occurred at the exact same time, which completely scrambles that narrative.
Let's look at the case of Antonio Romero Puritz.
According to the background files, Romero Curious is a 74-year-old retired professor.
He is a vocal anti-communist.
And crucially, he is a former political prisoner who was actually incarcerated during the old military dictatorship.
Sometime in 2025, the 74-year-old man sent out one single tweet criticizing the Cuban government.
He referred to the administration in Havana as the Tirania Castrista, the Castro tyranny.
One tweet expressing a political opinion about a foreign government.
And because of that single post, militants associated with the Communist Party of Uruguay, the PCU, which is part of the ruling Frente Amplio coalition, filed a formal legal complaint against him.
Based on that complaint, this 74-year-old former political prisoner was formally summoned to the cybercrime police headquarters for questioning regarding the political motivations behind his tweet.
He was interrogated by the state over an opinion.
And the real-world consequences didn't stop at the police station.
Following the public viralization of his case, the sources note that his physical home in the capital city of Montevideo was targeted by vigilantes.
Assailants attacked his house, throwing eggs at his blinds and littering his garden with torn flyers displaying pro-Cuba and anti-fascist slogans.
And as of the writing of these reports in early March 2026, the legal case against this retired professor remained completely open and active in the prosecutor's office.
The disparity in how the state apparatus is utilized is staggering.
And there's a third case mentioned in the documents that highlights the chaotic, reactive nature of the legal system right now.
It involves Sebastián Cabrera, a journalist for the major national newspaper El País.
Cabrera wrote an investigative public interest article. Following its publication, the head of a marine NGO named Richard Tisor filed a defamation complaint.
Based solely on that complaint, police cited Cabrera and demanded he come in to give a statement, completely bypassing the standard requirement for a judicial warrant.
And according to the timeline, the backlash to that specific event was immense. Press associations and journalism unions raised hell.
The outcry was so fierce that the Ministry of Interior was forced to rapidly draft and issue a brand new, formal directive.
This new rule explicitly prohibited the police from taking voluntary statements directly from accredited journalists in defamation cases,
mandating that any such investigation had to be routed strictly through prosecutors to ensure judicial oversight.
But look closely at the gap that new directive creates.
The state scrambled to create operational legal protections for credentialed journalists working for major newspapers.
But ordinary digital citizens, like the 74-year-old retired professor Antonio Romero Puritz, were given no such protection.
They remain entirely vulnerable to arbitrary police summonses simply for expressing political opinions online.
The law is creating a two-tiered system of free speech.
So we have to look at this paradox impartially, as we promised at the beginning of the show.
One side of the country looks at these police summonses and sees a vital, absolutely necessary defense against organized, hateful harassment and the destructive spread of right-wing fake news.
They see the state protecting the dignity of its citizens.
But the other side looks at the exact same stack of summonses and sees a terrifying, rapid slide into Cuban-style authoritarian censorship, where simply quoting a political opinion that opposes an allied regime gets an elderly man interrogated by an armed cyber police unit.
Let's translate this back to the 15-year-old sitting in our hypothetical civics class.
Imagine a student is frustrated and posts a sarcastic, highly critical meme about the school principal on their private social media page.
In a normal environment, maybe they get called into the office. Maybe they get a detention or a talking to from a counselor.
But in this scenario, the actual literal city police show up at the student's front door that evening to interrogate them about their motivations for disrespecting authority.
To a certain faction of students and teachers, this might seem like a brilliant zero-tolerance way to stop cyberbullying once and for all.
But to the rest of the student body, it means you have absolutely zero freedom of speech, and the school administration is rapidly morphing into a dictatorship.
It's terrifying because the boundary of what constitutes a crime becomes entirely subjective based on who is in power.
But here's where the narrative takes a massive left turn. Just when you think the Uruguayan state has acquired too much power over its citizens, our source material introduces a scenario where the state itself is completely, utterly powerless.
It introduces the concept of the sovereignty gap.
And the realization that the ultimate arbiter of truth isn't a government at all. It's big tech.
This is a vital conceptual shift. To understand the sovereignty gap, we have to look at a critical legal precedent established in the sources from 2017.
Involving an independent Uruguayan journalism outlet called Sudestada.
Sudestada published a massive, meticulously detailed journalistic investigation authored by Fabian Werner.
The piece exposed complex networks of corruption and money laundering tied directly to the infamous Panama Papers leak.
Crucially, the investigation specifically named a prominent local Uruguayan law firm, Algorta and Asociados, detailing its alleged links to Spanish political embezzlement schemes.
It was a quintessential, vital piece of public interest journalism, doing exactly what the press is supposed to do.
The article is out there, it's public record, but fast forward to 2021.
The sources show that a giant, trillion-dollar multinational tech corporation, Google, unilaterally decides to erase the article from its European search results.
Google didn't consult the Uruguayan government. They cited the European Union's GDPR, specifically the Right to be Forgotten clause, which had been invoked by a Spanish citizen mentioned in the article.
Later, Google compounded the censorship by citing US DMCA copyright laws.
With a few keystrokes in California, Google effectively deleted vital Uruguayan journalism from the global digital memory.
And Sudestada did not take this lying down. They fought back. They sued Google in the Uruguayan courts.
They filed an amparo action, which is a specific legal mechanism in Latin American law designed to protect constitutional rights.
Arguing that Google's actions violated their fundamental right to free expression and the public's right to information.
But when the case went before the Uruguayan justice system, the courts essentially threw their hands up in surrender.
Why? How can a national court refuse to protect its own press?
Jurisdiction. The Uruguayan courts ruled that they had absolutely no legal jurisdiction over the matter because Google LLC, the corporate entity controlling the search algorithm, was not legally domiciled within the physical borders of Uruguay.
They effectively ruled that unaccountable foreign technology corporations, utilizing foreign laws like the EU's GDPR or the US's DMCA, possess the unilateral, unappealable authority to dictate what information Uruguayan citizens can access.
And the sovereign national courts are completely powerless to stop it.
It's the ultimate schoolyard analogy. Going back to our classroom, imagine you, the student, spend months researching and writing a brilliant factual expose for the school newspaper about severe financial corruption in the cafeteria.
Everyone in the school is reading it. It's causing a massive stir.
But then, a giant robot owned by a massive corporation located in a completely different country walks through the front doors of your school.
The robot methodically rips the newspaper out of every single student's hands and runs it through a shredder.
You run to the principal's office, outraged, demanding they stop the robot.
And the principal just shrugs their shoulders and says, "Sorry, I can't do anything. That robot doesn't live in our school district, so school rules don't apply to it. My hands are tied."
That feeling of absolute impotence against an automated foreign entity is the sovereignty gap.
And this structural failure of the state leads directly into one of the most harrowing case studies in our entire stack of documents, the Baywatch paradox and the Nicole Eggert crisis of February 2026.
This is the moment where all these disparate threads, like the blind power of algorithms, the jurisdictional failure of the state, and the absolute necessity of asymmetrical digital density, violently collide.
I am so glad we are finally at the Nicole Eggert case because it reads like a cyber thriller, but it's entirely real.
Let's set the parameters. Nicole Eggert is an American actress, globally recognized for her starring role in the television series Baywatch in the 1990s.
More recently, and more importantly for this context, she is a survivor of breast cancer.
The sources outline that in early February 2026, she became the target of a highly sophisticated East Coast criminal ring.
The attackers, utilizing an email address identified as gulpersacker@hotmail.com, executed what is known as a SIM swap attack.
We need to explain the mechanics of a SIM swap, because it bypasses almost all standard security.
A SIM swap is a form of social engineering. The attackers do not need to guess your password.
Instead, they contact your cellular phone provider, impersonate you, and convince the telecom company to transfer your phone number to a new SIM card physically located in a device controlled by the hackers.
The moment that happens, your phone goes dead.
Every single two-factor authentication code, every password reset text message goes directly to the hackers.
Using this method, the criminal ring took total root-level control of Nicole Eggert's primary Meta account, which encompasses Facebook and Instagram.
And as the files detail, this wasn't just a standard hack where they post spam links. The cybercrime analyst described this as a scorched earth attack.
Eggert's Meta account wasn't just a social profile. It served as a deeply personal archive.
It contains 7 years of irreplaceable cancer diaries.
These were highly intimate records, photos, and medical updates documenting her stage 2 cribriform carcinoma diagnosis, her double mastectomy surgery, and her grueling chemotherapy treatments.
The hackers didn't just steal the account. They initiated a process to permanently destroy it.
They decoupled her phone number, stripped out all her legacy recovery email addresses, locked the security architecture to their own hardware keys, and initiated a permanent 30-day deletion countdown.
They were holding a decade of her medical history and emotional survival on digital death row.
And while the clock was ticking, they were actively utilizing her massive platform to execute wire fraud scams against her followers.
So Eggert does what any rational person would do. She tries to contact Meta to recover her account.
And this is where the concept coined by Alberto Hill as the Baywatch paradox manifests.
Right. Eggert is a globally verified public figure. Her television show was literally watched by over 1 billion people worldwide.
Her face is universally recognizable.
But when she submitted video selfies and government ID to Meta's automated recovery systems to prove she was being hacked, their trillion-dollar artificial intelligence completely locked her out.
It rejected her appeals instantly. Why? Because the hacker had successfully changed the IP address and the underlying hardware signature of the account?
Meta's AI was fundamentally mathematically blind to human context.
It prioritized the cryptographic authentication tokens generated by the hacker's stolen SIM card over the verifiable physical reality of a famous woman holding up her passport, begging for her medical records.
She was trapped in what the sources call a support loop of death, receiving automated rejection emails while her history was being deleted.
The machine could not recognize the human.
And this is where the narrative circles back to our central figure, Alberto Daniel Hill.
Because Eggert was trapped by the AI, she needed an unconventional strategy.
Fascinatingly, the initial intrusion wasn't flagged by Meta's advanced security algorithms. It was actually flagged by Hill's mother, sitting thousands of miles away in Montevideo, Uruguay.
She noticed anomalous, suspicious behavior on Eggert's account and alerted her son.
Which raises the obvious question. Why does a cybersecurity expert in Uruguay have a direct line to an American actress?
The sources explain this incredible connection. 30 years prior, in 1996, when Hill was just a teenager, he had built a fan website on GeoCities dedicated to Eggert's character on Baywatch.
Decades later, around 2018, they had reconnected professionally over a blockchain technology project and maintained a continuous correspondence.
Hill was able to leverage this massive, verified 7-year digital footprint of private direct messages to legally prove to Meta's human escalations team that he was her verified, trusted agent.
He used the history of their digital relationship to bypass the AI that had locked her out.
It was a brilliant move, but it immediately hit a corporate brick wall.
Meta's legal department, likely overwhelmed or relying on their own automated filtering, utilized an AirFi 50 server block.
This effectively bounced and rejected all of Hill's incoming legal emails, cease and desist letters, and evidence preservation notices.
It was an act of corporate willful blindness. Meta made itself legally unreachable.
So the AI won't listen, and the corporate lawyers have literally unplugged the phone. The account is days away from deletion. What does Hill do?
According to the forensic timeline, he engineers a masterpiece of asymmetric legal warfare. The documents call it the tricontinental pincer.
He realized he couldn't beat Meta with technical hacking, so he decided to hack their legal bureaucracy.
He decided to force what he called a compliance collision by weaponizing international law against the corporation.
It is a masterclass in jurisdictional judo. Hill simultaneously activated three distinct geographical legal levers.
First, the North American axis. He assisted in filing federal consumer wire fraud complaints in the state of California, where Meta is headquartered, establishing a domestic criminal record of the hack.
Second, the South American axis. He filed a formal criminal complaint with the Uruguayan cybercrime unit, creating a legal record in his own jurisdiction.
But the third lever was the absolute nuclear option, the European axis.
Because, as we established way back at the beginning of the show, Alberto Hill holds dual Italian citizenship.
Exactly. And as an Italian citizen, he falls under the protective umbrella of the European Union.
Hill formally contacted the Irish Data Protection Commission, which serves as Meta's lead regulatory authority in Europe. He reported a severe violation of the General Data Protection Regulation, the GDPR.
Now, initially, the Irish DPC tried to dismiss his complaint out of hand. They argued that Nicole Eggert resided in the United States, Hill resided in Uruguay, the hack happened in North America, and therefore European laws simply didn't apply to the situation.
But Hill knew the law better than they did. He legally invoked GDPR Article 3.1, which deals with the extraterritorial scope of European data law.
He presented a fascinating legal argument. He told the regulators, Nicole Eggert's account contains 7 years of my private direct messages. Because I am an Italian citizen, Meta is currently failing to secure and protect the personal, private data of an EU citizen that is stored on their compromised servers.
He explicitly threatened Meta with a formal GDPR audit. And under European law, a severe GDPR violation can result in a fine of up to 4% of a corporation's global annual turnover.
For Meta, that meant Hill was threatening them with a potential fine of roughly $5 billion.
He attached a massive financial liability to a customer service ticket. And then the situation escalated from a theoretical legal dispute into a physical, real-time threat.
On February 13th, the attacker, perhaps realizing they were being cornered, used Eggert's compromised Meta account to initiate a hostile direct voice call to Alberto Hill's personal cellular device in Uruguay.
They called him to intimidate him, but it was a fatal mistake.
It was a monumental error. The moment the hacker called Hill, the legal paradigm shifted entirely.
It was no longer just a privacy dispute over a deleted account or a case of wire fraud. It was an active instance of transnational cyberstalking.
Hill immediately escalated this new evidence directly to the Italian State Police cybercrime unit, known as the Polizia Postale.
He legally framed the hacker's phone call as atti persecutori, which is the specific charge for stalking and harassment under the Italian Penal Code.
He generated an active international criminal subpoena. Meta's corporate lawyers could use an Error 550 to block an annoying email from a user in Uruguay, but they absolutely could not ignore an active investigation by the Italian National Police into their servers being used to actively stalk an EU citizen.
And while this legal pincer was closing, the sources note that an independent hacktivist collective known as S.A.J.O.R. entered the fray.
They began forensically mapping the attacker's digital footprint, linking the hacker's IP addresses to specific Xbox and Roblox gaming accounts, and publicly preparing to expose the attacker's real-world identity to the FBI.
The pressure became insurmountable. Faced with this tricontinental pincer, an active Italian criminal investigation, the looming threat of a multi-billion-dollar GDPR fine, and the imminent public exposure by hacktivists, Meta's automated defenses finally shattered.
The issue was escalated to senior human executives. Realizing the legal jeopardy, these executives manually bypassed their own AI systems and executed what is known as a global session kill.
A global session kill. What exactly does that do?
It is a root-level administrative command. It forcibly and instantly invalidates every single active authentication token for that specific account worldwide.
In a fraction of a second, it kicked the hackers out of every device they were using, severed their connection, and locked down the architecture.
The human executives manually intervened, saved the account, and successfully rescued a decade of Nicole Eggert's irreplaceable medical diaries just days before they were scheduled for permanent deletion.
It is an incredible victory. But the sources note an absolute crowning irony to the Baywatch paradox that perfectly encapsulates everything we've talked about today.
Immediately after the human executives saved the account, Meta's automated security algorithm rebooted, analyzed the recent chaotic activity, and promptly suspended Alberto Hill's own personal Meta account.
The blind AI mathematically flagged the person who orchestrated the rescue as a secondary security threat.
It proves, without a shadow of a doubt, how profoundly dangerous it is for a society to rely solely on automated algorithms for digital governance and justice.
Which brings us to the final section of our massive syllabus today: Section 6. Writing the new rulebook. Because the current system is completely broken.
We have seen how citizens are crushed by the state and how the state is crushed by big tech. So how does a country like Uruguay or any democratic nation actually fix this mess and ensure survival in the digital age?
According to the documents, they are attempting a massive structural regulatory paradigm shift.
In late 2025 and into early 2026, a broad coalition of civil society organizations led by groups like DataSoc and Observacom and officially backed by UNESCO presented a comprehensive legal framework to the Uruguayan parliament.
It is titled The Basis para una Regulación Democrática de las Grandes Plataformas Digitales.
The basis. It is a 15-point set of guidelines aiming to do something incredibly ambitious: to legally force transnational technology monopolies, companies like Meta and Google, to respect local democratic rights.
Let's look deeply at the core goals of this framework because they address every failure we've discussed today. The first major pillar is algorithmic transparency.
The framework argues that users have a fundamental legal right to know exactly how a platform's AI functions.
They have a right to know how the algorithm moderates content, why specific posts are amplified, and crucially, why certain political opinions might be covertly shadow banned or suppressed without notification.
It's about pulling back the curtain on the machine. The second pillar is the guarantee of due process. This directly addresses the support loop of death that Nicole Eggert experienced.
The framework demands that users have the fundamental legal right to appeal an automated decision to an actual living human being.
If an AI decides to delete your account, or erase your business, or flag you as a threat, you must have a legal avenue to present context to a human moderator, rather than being endlessly rejected by a mathematical formula.
And the third pillar is perhaps the most legally contentious, as it directly addresses the pseudostata precedent and the sovereignty gap.
The framework demands national jurisdictional access. This would legally ensure that Uruguayan citizens have the explicit right to litigate against transnational tech entities within domestic Uruguayan courts.
If Google deletes Uruguayan journalism, Google must answer to a Uruguayan judge, not hide behind corporate headquarters in California or servers in Ireland.
Now, looking at the political climate we established in Section 1, I can immediately see the opposition crying foul. They might argue that giving the state the power to regulate these platforms is just a backdoor to state censorship.
But the defenders of the framework emphasize a very specific distinction in the language. They argue that this framework is strictly regulating the process of moderation, not the content itself.
It is designed to prevent unaccountable foreign corporations from acting as arbitrary private censors. It is framed as an anti-censorship mechanism designed to protect the user from the corporation.
But passing complex international regulatory laws takes years, and as we've seen, digital citizens are vulnerable right now, today.
So the source material also details the immediate individual defense strategies, what the industry calls OPSEC, or operational security, that experts like Alberto Hill advocate for surviving in this environment.
Let's run through those OPSEC recommendations because they are highly practical. First, Hill advises the mandatory use of end-to-end encryption for all communications, specifically utilizing protocols like PGP.
If the state decides to raid your house and seize your hardware, like they did to him, your private communications remain mathematically locked and inaccessible.
Second, he advocates for strict hardware sandboxing. This means keeping your personal devices, your work devices, and your sensitive projects completely physically separated to prevent the cross-contamination of digital evidence if you are ever investigated.
And crucially, he demands that users decouple their mobile phone numbers from their online authentication processes, moving exclusively to hardware security keys to prevent the exact type of catastrophic SIM swap attack that devastated Nicole Eggert.
But beyond the nuts and bolts of technical security advice, what is truly compelling in these final documents is the philosophical framework that Alberto Hill developed through his platform, known as the Cyber Midnight Club.
Through his writings and podcasts, he frequently discusses a concept known as the dead internet theory.
This is the growing, chilling realization that the web is increasingly becoming a sterile wasteland, where AI-generated bots are simply talking to other AI-generated bots in an infinite synthetic feedback loop. The human element is being drowned out by automation.
And to combat this synthetic reality, and to process his own severe PTSD resulting from his wrongful imprisonment and the destruction of his career, Hill champions a philosophy of radical, unapologetic human transparency.
This births his most powerful, defining concept, the proof of love protocol.
It is a beautiful subversion of tech terminology. In cryptocurrency, proof of work is the mathematical algorithm used to validate transactions on a blockchain.
Hill proposes that the only way to validate human existence in the age of AI is through proof of love. It is validation achieved not through computing power, but through shared human adversity, emotional vulnerability, and connection.
The sources provide a deeply moving example of this protocol in action. Hill preserved a deeply private, emotional audio message from the Argentine rock star Juan Manuel Moretti.
The audio was a message of support intended for Hill's ex-partner, Evelyn. Now, a lesser person might have posted that audio online for clout or validation.
But Hill never uploaded it to the internet. He kept it entirely offline, preserved on a secure drive, treating it as a private, emotional NFT.
It serves as a permanent, unalterable, deeply private timestamp of human connection and trauma recovery. He kept it deliberately safe from the synthetic, automated scraping systems of the public internet.
It is a profound act of digital preservation. And these final documents also highlight the grueling, unglamorous reality of what it actually means to be a digital dissident.
The sources detail private correspondence showing Hill engaging in high-stakes negotiations to secure remote cybersecurity contracts with firms in the United States and the European Union.
He wasn't doing this to get rich. He was doing it specifically to finance assisted reproductive technology.
He needed to pay for IVF procedures, costing upwards of $12,000, and coordinate a permanent relocation to Finland with his partner to escape the jurisdiction that destroyed his life.
It grounds this massive geopolitical cyber war in the most profound, intimate human vulnerabilities.
Okay, let's take a deep breath and try to synthesize the massive journey we've just been on.
We started an hour ago in a quiet, imaginary Canadian 10th grade classroom. We asked you to understand the fragility of the system.
And from there, we traveled into the chaotic reality of Uruguay's 2026 digital crisis.
We saw an elite ethical hacker wrongfully thrown into a maximum security prison because a technologically illiterate judge actually believed he could magically alter evidence with his mind.
We looked at the terrifying architecture of a $2 million state surveillance scanner, El Guardian, and watched as intelligence officers abused it to read diaries and spy on the journalists trying to expose them.
We watched the state's own digital identity collapse under the weight of the PKI catastrophe.
We examined the rapid judicialization of speech, watching a 74-year-old former political prisoner and ordinary digital citizens get dragged before cyber police units merely for posting political tweets.
We analyzed the sovereignty gap, watching Google erase history while national courts watched helplessly.
And finally, we witnessed a citizen utilize international GDPR law and Italian police subpoenas to fight a $1 trillion AI robot to save a celebrity's medical records.
It is the absolute perfect storm. It is the scientifically illiterate state violently colliding with the negligent automated corporation.
And the citizen is trapped right in the middle.
So, to you, the listener, sitting wherever you are right now, we are ending our classroom thought experiment. But before we go, I want you to take your own smartphone out of your pocket or off your desk, and I want you to look at it.
Because the exact same vulnerabilities we just spent an hour unpacking, the blind, unfeeling algorithms, the opaque, silently expanding surveillance networks, the extreme fragile nature of your freedom of speech, they do not just exist in a case study about Uruguay.
They apply to the device in your hand right now, no matter what stable democratic country you live in.
And if we connect all of this evidence to the absolute biggest picture, it leaves us with a final, vital, and frankly terrifying question for you to mull over long after this deep dive ends.
If our democratic human laws are moving far too slowly to understand the technology, and the technology is becoming far too automated and algorithmic to ever understand our humanity, who's actually governing our future?
Are you truly a citizen of a sovereign nation with constitutional rights, or are you ultimately just a data subject living your entire life in a jurisdiction of code?
That is a heavy, essential question to chew on. Keep questioning the digital world around you. Keep looking for the human context behind the algorithms, and never ever assume that the locks in the door are unbreakable. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Stay curious, stay secure, and we'll see you next time.